So I'd like to welcome today's meeting Anne Bonner, outgoing Managing Director of Donegal Airport, Stephen O'Cloughan, Chair of Donegal Airport, Ms Eilish Docherty, incoming Managing Director, Donegal Airport, Mr John Mulhern, CEO of Corry Airport, Mr Basil Sheeran, Chief Financial Officer, Corry Airport, and Mr Joe Gilmore, Managing Director, Ireland West Airport. You're all very welcome. Sorry for the delay in bringing you in. Note on privilege. All witnesses are again reminded of the long-standing parliamentary practice that you should not criticise or make charges against any person or entity by name or in such a way as to make him or her or it identifiable or otherwise engage in speech that might be regarded as damaging to the good name of the person or entity. Therefore, if your statements are potentially defamatory in relation to an identifiable person or entity, you will be directed to discontinue your remarks. It is imperative that you comply with any such direction. For witnesses attending remotely, there are some limitations to parliamentary revision, as such may not benefit from the same level of immunity from legal proceedings as a witness physically present does. Witnesses participating in this committee session from a jurisdiction outside the state are advised that they should also be mindful of their domestic law, how it may apply to the evidence they give. Members are reminded of the long-standing parliamentary practice to the effect that they should not comment on, criticise or make charges against a person outside the House or Houses, or outside the Houses, or an official either by name, such a way as to make him or her identifiable. I now call on Mr O'Cloughan. Am I pronouncing that correctly?
Steve O'Cloughan, Corry.
Yeah, Cloughan. And Ms Bonner to make her opening statement on behalf of Donegal Airport. Thank you. You proceed. Thank you.
Gurmagad Corry. Corry is involved in Cochiste, couldn't banish yet, like it's called Stura Airport Donegal Fall to Ravindesha, Corlari, and the Castisha in you. Airport Agenation to Donegal the month no only the Gotouche. Agus Couldn't call the first of India, her fall, which Sihadina, Agus Costa Sea or €100 million to Lian Gest. One over the airport, Lehal, Cleve, Air Valach, Donegal, Alaclea, Agus Donegal, Glasgow, Hamala Shelvishi, General, Etlich, the Cart HLT Privajaha, Ibraham Milita, Agus Freshen, Shelvish, and Guard the Hosta. Say in Corloch, Stover there, no Erling is Regan of Maravi, Achan Shelvish Richten of Palaclea, Fall, Finglar, PSO, no Ibraham Shelvishi Pipely. Agus playing Corloch Logan Air, Achan Shelvish Glasgow, Fall, one Trocht, other one. Therefore, Oosfeld passionary went to Mach, Ravilis and Hocht, Tra, or Shaska Mile, Pesha, passionary gish. On Airport TD or Fiche Doye, Erindinch and Trocht, the went to Maharish, Agus Tashina, the Ready Hill, Blian in Ye, Bliana, Agus Caracul Mile, Hulke, passionary gish, and Ravilis and Edig. Initially, Niho Island, Erna Air Force Regonacha. Tá her allhór COVID-19 a gatian scoile for the down. Agus meas na sin tionchar cuasaí eitliachta. Ní héad na sríanta tráchta agus daoine cuine as de féin bhána tá gist, mar taimlíar dín freisin faoi sábhailteacht air heistal. An titim nuocha faoin géad líon baisnarí mí Ibran agus Bealtainna an titim riamh. Agus cégur chuidiú an seachtain Shafted Ivory Giria, Jaidelin and Fudden are father, Hunyal, Margawan with Gas game coative and temporary wage subsidy scheme to Hidden Realtish. I think for Miltonach at an Arnold Torresrota, Erin Garant for a quarantine cardiac law, a hurter or passionary international. Couldn't the passionary Shagamorlish and Rat or Cantor near Whiskers. A quid ward and trough, Etriach the Shabant of Letty Balaclea, a Panim Quidio, Hamala, Estiga Glasgow, no risk no Itan Shesher. Egul Shervish Balaclea, Gobergama, Marisna, Tamid Fo Sequinial Sulgair, a Boncostas, Agus Erin Parala, Agus Tamid Faltakia or Scheme, Kutiv and Realtish, Inish Animation on EWSS. One in Chas Car Brigade, Customs Umlong, every Hondish and Parala Shaw. Scheduling or God, Spaniel issue is faded, as a Kenya left long the Eoghan Kena. Nisha Hirely, Guadam, here in Koyaki and Banisher Shore Airport and Boniliana, Dry, Mission Corlomashal and Kashte as Berla or Margaret.
Got a Margaret?
Yes, Anne.
Yeah. The future of the sector, as the most remote regional airport in the country with no rail network and an inferior road network compared to other locations, Donegal Airport is now recognised as a key element of the region's infrastructure for business and tourism development, and especially for the essential needs such as health and education. An independent economic impact study in 2019 by Fitzpatrick Associates established that Donegal Airport's contribution to the regional economy in terms of direct, indirect and induced economic impact is 46.6 million, and indirectly supports employment in the Northwest region amounting to 393 full-time jobs. The future of Donegal Airport depends on the continuation of the PSO essential service, linking the county to the capital by flight in 45 minutes compared to 4 to 5 hour road journeys depending on the part of the county in which you live. Donegal Airport certainly meets the criteria for a PSO service and must be extended beyond the end of the current contract in 2022. With regards to state funding, the development of the Regional Airports Programme RAP by the Department of Transport, Tourism and Sport under EU regulations has given the regional airports the necessary support to enable them to plan and implement the required capital projects for safe, secure and regulatory compliant airport operations under CAPEX and PPRC programmes. The operational on PPRO programme contributes to the costs associated with the provision of essential services with no economic return, such as air traffic control, emergency and security services. Essentially, these funds enable the provision of public services by private airport operators. Although much work was undertaken with input from all stakeholders, the current Regional Airports Programme has not yet been agreed, and the airports are awaiting confirmation of this longer-term RAP approval in order to plan ahead. In saying that, we welcome the Minister's announcement yesterday that the funding for the 2021 for the regional airports has been increased in the current climate. With regards to the introduction of the EU traffic light system and the COVID testing at airports, Donegal Airport welcomes the Minister's decision to progress the implementation of the EU traffic light system to reboot international travel, and we look forward to further detail on how this will be implemented. We believe that pre-departure COVID testing may be the most effective way to allow unrestricted travel between countries and to restore consumer confidence in air travel. We will be happy to work with authorities in facilitating such testing and stand ready to progress whatever measures are required to be implemented. A robust monitoring of the testing regime would have to form part of the overall process. And that concludes our statement. We'll
now proceed to Mr. Monheron.
Good afternoon, and Chairperson, Senators, Deputies and members of the Joint Committee on Transport and Communication Networks. Thank you for the opportunity to contribute this opening statement to the committee for your consideration. We fully appreciate your limited time schedule defined by risks associated with COVID-19, and as such, we will keep this statement brief. It is important and appreciated that the regional airports have a voice that is heard with regard to any decision making or discussion on policy development in government and opposition, and also to represent our colleagues in tourism and many other fields of commerce that were equally reliant on air travel. It is correct to state clearly in this forum that indeed so many are dependent in rural Ireland on reliable air transport and have also endured the unfortunate consequences of COVID-19 on their businesses and livelihoods. In Kerry, we, as like all the regional airports and your members, are eager to secure a real and absolute recovery in the coming months and years. In the near future, it would be very helpful to get a positive announcement regarding the Regional Airports Programme, which would support us in re-establishing our path to growth and sustainability in the future. We can all understand that this journey has been given a significant blow and set us back perhaps several years. However, we still believe that with the support of the programme and sustained state funding, we can continue to contribute so much more than we receive to our rural economies and the greater national purse. And of course, we should add, which was announced last evening, that we welcome very much indeed the announcement by government, and we thank the Minister for Transport, Eamon Ryan, and Minister of State, Hildegard Naughton, and our friends and colleagues in government, Deputy Brendan Griffin and Norma Foley, for the support through what has been a nightmare for us all here in Kerry and all the regions. 2020 promised so much for Kerry Airport as we celebrated 50 years of providing air transport in the county and region. Several upgrades to our passengers' facilities, along with the announcement of our new route to Manchester, promised so much, including a passenger increase of 10% on the 370,000 passengers handled in 2019. Rebranding and new marketing plans, along with the success of the Wild Atlantic Way Tourism Initiative, promised another successful year, not only for us, but also for our colleagues in Ireland West and Donegal. Unfortunately now, beyond what could ever have been envisioned less than 1 year ago, the impact of COVID-19 will see passengers' numbers fall approximately 90% on that of 2019 across all the airports. And the symptoms of that critical decline is felt in so many ways and across so many industries, including tourism, which accounts for 25% of all employment in our county. We have accepted that sacrifices in travel were necessary to protect the greater good. However, it is a battle every day to find balance between the commercial instinct to drive up passenger numbers by whatever means, and the need to protect our vulnerable population, frontline staff, and finite healthcare facilities. Now, as we must again endure winter's inevitable inpatient bed crises pressures in the midst of a second surge of SARS coronavirus 2. The announcement of the adoption of the European traffic light system is very welcome indeed, and is seen by us in Kerry as a safe and manageable method to begin to reopen and recover overseas air travel. Decisions by several European countries and our neighbours in England to follow our lead and introduce level 5 or similar restrictions will see drops to below 50 positive cases per 100,000 population and lower than 4% positivity rates, which will open up many corridors of free and safer travel in the very near future. Like the rest of the world, we pray that recent announcements in vaccine development will at some stage next year begin the real healing that is so desperately sought by us all. Kerry Airport is investigating the option of ensuring access for passengers to PCR COVID testing to passengers who would need to avail of it through a local private healthcare facility and at a cost that would be considered reasonable. We respect the science that suggests any other methods of testing outside of PCR, including LAMP and rapid antigen, do not presently provide the amount of efficacy that is presently required. We believe that off-site PCR testing 1 to 2 days prior to travel represents the best way forward for restrictions relating to orange, red or grey territories. Again, we thank you for this opportunity to share our position and experiences of the effects of COVID-19, and we'd be very happy to answer any questions or develop further any particular points that we've made in this statement. It's more Gwyn on Jess Shotlower, less on Gwishte. Thank you.
Mr. Mulhern, we now proceed to Mr. Gilmore on behalf of Ireland West Airport in Knock. Mr. Gilmore.
Good afternoon, Chairman and members of the committee. Thank you for the invitation to provide a witness statement to the committee. I wish to provide just a very short summary, as the other airports have, on a brief background on Ireland West Airport. I know many of you are familiar with the airport, but just to give it some context in relation to the aviation landscape on the island, give you an update on the current situation and likewise in relation to how we see the situation going forward. Ireland West Airport opened in May 1986 and was managed originally by Connacht Airport Development Company, which was effectively a private company with 36 shareholders, led by Monsignor Horton at the time. The state invested about £10 million at the time into the airport, and Monsignor and his team raised about £5 million to complete the airport. In 1991, the government withdrew its nominees to the board of the original airport at the time, and a public trust was established by deed of trust in 1991. It was constituted as the Horton International Trust, so we're a community trust. The trust was signed at the time by the Minister for Transport, the late Seamus Brennan, a Galway man, with the objectives of developing the airport on a commercial basis for the people of the West and the Northwest, expanding air services to international markets and supporting employment, tourism and business growth in the region. Now, furthermore, any dividends or profits that the airport can make must be reinvested in the airport, and as trustees and board of directors of the airport provide their services on a fully voluntary basis. Therefore, there are no private shareholders, and the rights attached to the trust shares are to invest in, encourage and facilitate investment in the future of the airport and to fulfil the objectives of the airport. Just wanted to set that out because there is at times some degree of, I won't say confusion, but some clarification needed in terms of the actual ownership structure here of the airport. Also, I'm pleased to advise back in 2017, as a further confidence vote in the airport, 7 local authorities across the region invested into the airport and took a 17.5% shareholding, with the objective of further driving economic development and with a key focus of inbound tourism, business and economic development, leading to strong growth in inbound visitors and the designation of the airport last year as a strategic development zone, the only airport in Ireland with that zoning. We are unique in many ways compared to other airports, in particular our ownership structure, and in particular the equity shareholding taken by the 7 local authorities. It's given us a unique regional investment and partnership in the facility between the people of the region and government. It's also been a very positive endorsement by local government in the airport and has helped us to drive forward over the last 3 to 4 years in positive collaboration and cooperation. And in particular, in trying to harness the very large diaspora from the West and the Northwest, the airport has internationally. As I outlined, the airport was designated last year as a strategic development zone and as and also recognised as one of the 4 main airports in the country, with the commitment from government in the Project Ireland Plan 2040 and the National Development Plan for increased investment and prioritising the airport as a critical driver of economic and tourism development for the West and the Northwest. The airport serves a quarter of the country's landmass from a regional development perspective, with jet runway capabilities. And with a population catchment of 1.2 million across the West, Northwest and Midlands, we have the 3rd largest runway in the country, which we're extremely proud of, which was put in place 35 years ago by visionaries who drove the development of the airport. And we have the capability to handle all types of aircraft. We were pleased back in 2013 to welcome wide-bodied 767s for the G8 Summit, Air Force 2 with Joe Biden back in 2016, and most recently we welcomed Pope Francis in 2018 as part of his visit to Ireland. We've experienced significant passenger growth since 2010, and last year was our record year at over 800,000 passengers. As a non-state owned airport, we operate under a fully commercial remit. Now, while we do receive funding as the other regional airports do under the RAP programme, we have managed to self-finance over 90% of our operating costs up until this year from commercial and aeronautical revenues that we receive from passengers using the airport. Just finally, the airport, we're a key gateway, as the other airports are, in delivering 12 million visitors to the region so far since we opened. And with an estimated annual tourism spend of over 200 million, we're contributing 112 million of GVA to the local economy and supporting 3,000 jobs locally. Just quickly coming to 2020, like the other airports, we were looking forward to a very successful year. We were driving hard to achieve 1 million passengers and looking at a very strong performance in route network. However, on March the 5th, one of our main airline partners, Flybe, who serviced the Birmingham, Edinburgh and Manchester services, unfortunately went into insolvency as a result of COVID, and that was the first blow. And that was a loss of over 100,000 passengers. When COVID hit at the end of March, the airport was forced to close its doors for the first time in 35 years and lay off all its staff for a 3-month period. It was as a direct result of our remaining airline partners, Aer Lingus and Ryanair, withdrawing their services. We resumed flights as the other airports did from July the 1st, with Ryanair and Lauda operating at 50% of their frequency. However, as we all know at this stage, it was a false dawn for air travel. Passenger load factors were extremely low, below 30%, and passenger numbers as a result have collapsed by over 90% since then, as a result of the pandemic and the severe stringent travel restrictions that had to be imposed. In late October, Ryanair confirmed an 80% reduction in our winter schedule, and as of last week, a complete suspension of flights into the airport for the next 4-week period, as happened in the other airports. As a result, we have restructured the business over the summer period, and unfortunately have had to reduce our workforce by up to 70%. To date, we've had 43 redundancies and 100 staff layoffs, 100 staff placed on temporary layoffs. And the remaining staff that are keeping the airport operational on a 3-day week. So it's been an extremely difficult period for the airport, as all the other airports, in trying to manage what has been 6 different periods of restructuring. We do appreciate and acknowledge the support received from government through the EWSS and TWSS, and the rates relief received from the local authorities. However, despite that, we're sustaining very significant losses, as we have no commercial revenues or no passenger flow through the airport, and we're looking at losses of close to 4 million and a reduction in our turnover by 11 million. So it's pretty catastrophic from a business perspective. It goes without saying the region is deeply concerned in the medium term that vital air services would be lost to regional Ireland, services which could be lost for a very long time, given that the current market conditions and travel restrictions are in place, and industry experts are forecasting it could be as it could be 2024 before there's a recovery to air travel. In terms of what we're looking at and what we have been in discussion with government and in the media reports, which would provide more details on that. I think yesterday's announcement to a degree supersedes a number of our asks. I was a member of the Aviation Task Force, the government-appointed task force back in June and July, which produced the report outlining key recommendations. And that task force report was very clear on what the specific asks were. From our perspective, we were calling on government to provide additional support to help us bridge the gap in the significant losses. In a normal year, the current regional airports programme is very sufficient in supporting us as an airport to achieve a break-even situation. However, as a result of the very dramatic collapse in traffic, we were seeking additional funding support for this year, which is a very exceptional year, to a level that would cover the airport's net loss position of close to 4 million. Given that, unlike in previous years, the capability of non-core airport activities, i.e. commercial, car parking, retail, catering, car hire, would typically provide income to the airport that we could cover the shortfall. We were seeking the implementation of the Aviation Task Force report, and the restoration, incentivisation to restore critical air travel into the region. And I do recognise measures taken yesterday in the support package for the aviation sector that were announced start to address that for the initial 3-month period from January to March next year, with the charges rebate scheme being proposed for airlines. Finally, on the adoption of the European Commission's traffic light system, again, we're pleased to see that moving forward. And what we are seeking is that government would continue to work with the airports and ourselves in mapping out a common system of pre-departure testing at all Irish airports in advance of the Christmas travel period. Like all the regional airports, we have in the month of December, we'd have over 50,000 people that would use the airport. Most of those would travel from the UK market from 9 destinations we serve. Many of those are looking to book at this stage and wondering can they return home for Christmas. So we're pleased with the clarifications that are starting to flow from government and in terms of travel from green, orange and red listed countries. In terms of testing, like the other airports, we are evaluating private operators to provide on-site testing here, and we would expect to have that in place when we would restart operations in mid-December. Finally, and in relation to the whole travel side, we would, from a West of Ireland perspective, be much more dependent on the UK market, and if there was a mechanism for government to prioritise the opening up of an air corridor with the UK, with limited or zero travel restrictions for the regions with similar disease levels, as regional airports rely to a much larger degree than, say, Dublin on this market, it would also be critical in supporting the survival of thousands of jobs in the SME sector and the tourism and hospitality sectors through this pandemic, and now the imminent challenges we're facing as we go forward with Brexit. If that was feasible for government to look at that as a separate subcommittee to see how we could open a corridor from regions of the UK to regional Ireland, because there has been times in the last 2 to 3 months, and don't take this up the wrong way, that there's been a view that it would have been safer to travel, say, to the London market than cross the country to parts of Dublin. And that's just purely from a pandemic perspective, and that people travelling from regional London are being requested quarantine for 2 weeks. But just to highlight a point, so again, it's in terms of our dependency on the UK market is well over 3/4 of our business, and if that market could be opened up and expedited, if you like, that would be of great benefit. Thank you again for your time, and I look forward to taking your questions.
Thanks very much, Mr. Gilmore. And just for housekeeping, if I could ask the people on virtual to make sure you're on silent, on mute your loudspeakers while other people are speaking, just in terms of the quality of sound. So I've now moved to members. I'm going to limit it to 5 minutes on the initial rounds because we're tight on time. So Deputy Dillon, you have 5 minutes. And I'd suggest with people, limit your questions so the invitees have an opportunity to respond. Thank you.
And I want to thank our witnesses for joining us today from the regional airports, especially Joe Gilmore, CEO of Ireland West Airport, Knock. And also I'd like to thank the Chairman for the invitation he's put towards the regional airport. They are central to regional balanced development and should be a core element of government policy going forward in the aviation sector. I suppose as a TD for the Mayo constituency and for the people that I represent, Ireland West Airport Knock is a place we are very proud of, and it's a different airport than many, with 7 local authority stakeholders, and it operates in trust of the people of Connacht, and as an independent operator. People in the West hold Knock Airport in the highest regard, and it's seen as the beating heartbeat of the wild Atlantic way. So, I want to congratulate the board of Knock Airport West for their continued work. The past number of years, we've seen record numbers last year, well over 800,000, and hopefully into the future we can hit the 1 million passenger mark. The past number of months have seen how important rebuilding lost air connectivity is, and Knock Airport is no different than the other regional airport, and it's vital to build our economy post-COVID. So, it's important that the recommendations from the Aviation Task Force recognises the importance of our regional airport in terms of delivering regional balanced development. We've seen, with Knock Airport, it has a significant economic impact for the northern and western region. Ernst & Young did a report in 2019, and it talked about tourism spending in passengers equating to 217 million, and it supports over 3,000 jobs. So it's crucially important. And while yesterday's announcement of 6 million funding towards the operational costs in Knock Airport, and also the additional airport charge rebate scheme, it's crucially important now that the Minister provides some clarity in terms of why the process requires EU Commission approval. I feel at this present time the Department and the State should be, writing cheques to support our regional airports. We see that 32 million was allocated to the state-owned airports without any EU approval. So, I feel that the Department needs to put a derogation in place to provide funding. During COVID, if there's a possible state aid issue, then let's address it to the normal channels at a later date. But we need to ensure that this funding trickles down to the regional airports to where it's needed at the coalface, and that we need to avoid any potential roadblocks that may present itself. In relation to my questioning, I have 3 questions just to the CEO of NOC, just in regards to NOC's strategic plan in terms of your marketing plan in the short to medium term. I know the UK routes and EU routes are very important.
You only have a minute left, right?
Yeah.
You need to get.
And just finally, Joe, just in relation to the STZ for NOC Airport, what efforts are being made to avail of this designation and the benefits of this tax designation zone? Thank you, Chairman.
Mr. Gilmore.
Thank you, Deputy. Just to answer your questions, we have a comprehensive marketing plan ready to go once we can get the green light in terms of trying to recover the 500,000 of traffic we have in the UK market in particular, and that's where we would see recovering immediately, and then moving into our European routes for hopefully next summer. In terms of the STZ, again, we're the only airport in the country with this designation. We are in ongoing dialogue with the local authority, who is the planning authority that granted the STZ, and there is significant scope for the creation of up to 5,000 jobs in that zone, and the local authority is moving forward with us on plans for that. The next stage will be finding an overall development plan that will provide the financial incentivisation to make it attractive for companies to start to locate there.
Thank you very much, Deputy Dillon. I move on to Deputy Cleary, and you have 5 minutes.
Gormagad go Hirley agus buchas go dtí an teachta Cahal Crow as ucht an Sirchán le hain crunú aniu agus gáim fáilte go dtí an trí airport Reganach ach trí airport I chun na Gaeltacht freisin. She sin dábhachtach. Particularly want to welcome Joe Gilmore. I've worked closely with you in the last few weeks. Just firstly, in relation to the announcements yesterday, and this will apply to all 3, what is your knowledge about the state aid condition on it? It seems unusual. I understand, Chairman, and it might be an issue for the report, that many state aid conditions have been suspended for COVID-related funding. And given that state aid doesn't seem to apply to the state-owned airports, why does it apply to the regional airports programme? Do you have any information on that? Secondly, in relation to the traffic light system, has there been much engagement with you, particularly you, Joe, and I know Donegal as well, have a particular dependence on the UK market, as to how that's going to work? And I think your point about region to region is important, and that might be something, Chairman, for inclusion in the final report about regional air corridors across regions. When do you see that being effective? When do you see it being operative? And when will you be able to inform passengers as to what they will be able to do during the forthcoming Christmas period? Just in relation to the regional airport programme, aviation is going to be very difficult post-COVID and very different. Do you think the regional airport programme as it currently is fit for purpose in a post-COVID environment? Do we need to inject more flexibility into it and make it a little bit more responsive to how changing things are at the moment? The
questions really are for all airports, so we might start with Mr. Cullen from Donegal, and then we move on to Corry, and Mr. Mulhern, and then Mr. Gilmore. So you might just, the state aid derogation and obviously the EU traffic light system for Deputy Cleary's questions.
Steve.
Okay, Hirely, Deputy Corry and Dylan asked a question on state aid. I think it's a question that the department will initially. It's a question for the department to check out if it's necessary. If not, we'd welcome the aid to be released as soon as possible. We also would like to welcome the additional supports that were announced yesterday through the airports, which are on par with what was available last year. It's an increase, which we welcome that, and we'll wait our discussions with the department with the state aid rules and the compliance with those.
Mr. Mulhern.
Yeah, similar to the others, we have asked questions of how the state aid rules would apply, and we're waiting for confirmation from the department. And we ourselves, when we look at how the COVID testing would apply, we understand that PCR is for now, the recognised method of testing. It's not a rapid form of testing and requires a day or two or up to 3 to get a result from most of the private providers of that type of testing. So we believe that testing for PCR should be done off-site and not at the airports by those intending to travel. And we're going, when we finish our negotiations, which will complete next week, with a private provider, we will make those avenues to testing available to those who will need to travel during the winter. Thank you.
Mr. Gilmore.
Yeah, thanks, Deputy, for the question. In terms of state aid, we, on reading the detail on the department notification, we noted that the additional 6 million provided to the regional airports is still subject to EU Commission approval. And to the point you highlighted there, the 10 million of funding that was provided in the budget 21 and the additional 22 million to the state airports, Shannon and Cork, doesn't appear to be subject to EU Commission approval. So we're seeking clarification on that, because while we understand there are requirements, we would have thought, given the crisis and the COVID situation, that a derogation could be secured from a state aid point of view for this particular emergency funding, and it could be provided to the airports in an immediate way. In relation to region for the Christmas period, we will be updating our website today with the most recent information from government's announcement yesterday in terms of the green, red and orange zone testing. And the note that in particular red, that one does not have to self-isolate if they get a negative PCR test 5 days after arriving into Ireland, which is a positive development. So we will be updating our website for passengers that are thinking about travelling with the most recent government information, and that's where we're taking our direction from. In relation finally to the current regional airports programme, I think in the context of all the challenges the aviation sector is facing, there is discussion as to a new national aviation policy being revised from the previous policy, I think in 2015, and encompassing the landscape now and the future we all face. And is the current programme fit for purpose? I think it has been, and it has been an excellent programme for the last 5 years. I do think going forward, there will be areas that it can be enhanced and worked on to adapt to the new environment we're all facing. And just one final point on that, in particular, the restoration of air access. The number of air carriers is reducing. It's getting much more difficult to find carriers that will effectively take the risk on flying into regional airports, because it's a much higher risk than actually flying into capital cities around Europe for airlines. So in the areas of subvention to air carriers to put on new services to the regions, I think that's a whole area that needs further discussion and exploration, because we're finding it extremely difficult to attract new carriers in ordinary times, and I know going forward it's going to be even more difficult.
Deputy Rose Conway Walsh, 5 minutes.
Cathaoirleach, and thank you to Rory O'Murcu for allowing me to come in and take his place today. I'm going to confine my questions and my address to Knock Airport and to Joe Gilmer. And at the outset, I want to commend you, the management and the board, and all of the staff for the wonderful work that you've been doing. I absolutely endorse and believe in the model that you have, supported by the local authorities. I want to acknowledge as well the 43 redundancies, people who are made redundant, and up to 100 staff who are on temporary layoff. I think it's important to remember them at this time as well. In terms of the state aid and the 6 million that was announced yesterday, looking at the temporary framework and what was given to Germany in terms of the state aid there and the support for airports, I really cannot see how that money could be in any way jeopardised because the guarantees are already in there to ensure that any aid that's given doesn't exceed the damage that's been done by COVID. I want to ask you in terms of the testing and tracing. You're saying that you're looking at some private companies. Have you any idea, Joe, of the costs that might be involved per passenger there at the moment in what you're looking at?
Thank you, Deputy. In terms of a benchmark of costing, and this is taken from information provided by other airport colleagues and some indicative costings, it will be somewhere in the region, starting at, I think, at about €149 for a standard PCR test, and increasing depending on the turnaround time. So it's not inexpensive. So it would be in the region of 150 to €200.
Okay. So how beneficial would it be for you to have a government-sponsored testing scheme at airports such as Knock Airport?
Look, this is a private venture, so at the moment, passengers will decide if they plan to travel, they will have to cover the cost of that. It will obviously be very beneficial if those costs can be reduced to make travel more. It'll be about cost and convenience, to be honest with Deputy, because
would you be looking
I think people will decide they'll travel on those basis, and obviously costs of that level will limit the number of people that will make the decision to travel.
Because my time is limited, Joe, would you just see that as being on-site or off-site in terms of where the testing would take place?
At this point, we would be looking to work on the same basis as in particular Cork and Shannon, to have it on site, probably a car park kind of drive-through facility. But again, it's going to depend on the numbers and the level of demand for it and the number of flights we have on over the Christmas period. And to be honest, that's yet to be determined based on the level of bookings that the airlines will start to see in the next 2 or 3 weeks.
Right. So just in terms of the 4 million losses and then the money that was announced yesterday, the 6 million, how much of a shortfall have you at the moment? How much of a gap is there for Knock Airport in terms of making up the lost revenue?
Well, at the moment, Deputy, under the current regional airports programme, the airport would expect to receive just over about €1 million. So at the moment, there's a shortfall in the region of 2.5 to 3 million. And we're awaiting communication back from the department, as we outlined, in terms of this additional funding that has been provided for yesterday.
There's obviously more needed. What's the costing on your marketing plan that you have done?
Our annual spend on the marketing plan here would be about $500,000 a year. We'll be spending on marketing, and that would be a combination of international marketing and regional marketing across Ireland.
Okay, Grant. And in terms of the timeline for the SDZ zone, what is the immediate thing that needs to happen for that to move on, and how do you see the timeline of that going?
In terms of the SDZ zone, as I outlined to Deputy Dillon or Deputy Cleary, I think it was, the planning authority is been the main driver of the zone with us, and we're having further engagement with the state agencies in terms of how to formulate an overall development plan for that zone. I think it's acceptable. It's accepted that it is a medium-term, 10 to 20-year plan here we're looking at. And COVID, to be honest, Deputy, in the last 9 months has overtaken all of this.
I haven't mentioned Brexit at all and my time is up, but we'll talk about that on another day. Thank you, Joe.
Deputy Conway Walsh. Senator Paddy Burke, you have 5 minutes.
Thanks, First of all, I'd like to thank Senator Buttermore for letting me in his place to ask a few questions. I'd like to welcome all the guests as well to the meeting. And I'd like to ask, in relation to Joe Gilmore said that the airport was closed from March until July. And what kind of an effort was it to get back up running again, Joe? Was it an enormous effort, or how did you go about getting back up? Because it would seem from you went from a standing still position to going forward again.
Thank you, Senator. Just you highlight the fact one critical element in all of this has been our staff, and in being able to, and as the other airports will know, staff through all of this have been severely impacted, and just want to acknowledge their support, cooperation and understanding through all of this, and they've suffered severely, as many of the hundreds of thousands of people that have lost their jobs through this. So without them, we wouldn't have been able to do what we did. So they were very supportive. Also, the state agencies, in terms of the department itself, transport, the Irish Aviation Authority, in ensuring that we maintained our licensing and we maintained all our fire safety, security systems, air traffic control, and all the operational requirements. So it took quite an effort. But as I said, we got back up and running in July, and thankfully we met all of the licensing and safety requirements, and we were able to get back up into full operation. We had to take those measures. They might have sounded severe, but from a cost perspective and being a commercially run business here, we had to take those measures at that time.
You said that you have incurred losses of nearly 4 million. Where do you get to a break-even point? We'll say going forward, do you still have to get up to 800 or 500,000 passengers to get to a break-even point, or do you still see losses going forward for the next number of years up to 2024 or 2025?
The airport, from a passenger perspective, we were profitable over the last couple of years before the receipt of state funding under the Regional Airports Programme. So our sweet point is in the region of 800 to 1 million passengers. Again, it depends on the mix and it depends on the spend of those passengers through the airport, but it's in the region of 800 to 1 million passengers. So we are, as I outlined in my submission, covering on average 90% of our operational costs annually, if not 100%. Where we do need continued support going forward, as all the other airports do, is on significant capital expenditure that's required to maintain airports as key pieces of infrastructure across the country. For example, we were very thankful for the funding we received last year for the overlay of our main runway and other key projects like the whole baggage screening. So there was 15 million invested in that, which we received 75% of that from government. So again, capital is the major spend item.
Yeah. In relation to the state aid, the Secretary General of the Department of Transport in Brussels said that there would be a very quick turnaround of projects that would go to them in relation to state aid. So I was just wondering, have the department been in contact with any of the regional airports in relation to a programme that may be going forward in relation to a new programme, we'll say, for under the state aid rules that would qualify under new state aid rules, or ones that would have to be clarified or approved by the Commission?
Do any of the other airports wish to answer? I can take it, but please, I don't feel I'm...
Steve O'Coolan. No, not yet. As the announcement was made last night, we expect to be in contact with them before the end of the week. And normally channels are quick with the department and open, so we'll be doing that when we get back to the day.
The department haven't been in touch, have they, in saying that they're putting a new state aid programme in place, or applying for a new under the new rules, that they'll be applying for a new scheme?
Well, we're working on the current one at the moment, but where are we at? Hello. Yeah, we're just working on our current 2020 programme at the moment. And now that funding is available for 2021, we'll be looking at what's required going forward. And that it's early days, obviously, so we just need to assess our needs as well before we go knocking on the door of the department at this point in time for 2021.
But the 6 million, the new 6 million that's been given could need to be under state aid rules.
Deputy, Senator, that's correct. I think it is worth noting that the Minister Nocton for Budget 21 confirmed 21.3 million for the regional airports next year in 2021, and that would be year one, year one of the next regional airports programme, if I have the timing right. So I know there is a serious commitment to confirm. It hasn't been officially, I think, signed off, but a further 5 years of the next regional airports programme. On the state aid issue, from our side, we've been in communication with the department yesterday, and they are very open. And as mentioned earlier, the dialogue is very positive with them. However, the state aid one is one that we're, I suppose we need further clarity. We'd be hopeful that a derogation could be sought on that, where monies could be put into airports on that basis due to the COVID crisis.
Would it be fair to say, Senator Burke, that you would request a committee write to the department seeking clarification around this area?
That would be very positive, Chairman.
Thank you. I was anticipating that question. So as a committee, we'll write to get clarification around the state aid. Senator Ned O'Sullivan, you have 5 minutes, Senator.
And I welcome our witnesses, and I will have a few questions, I suppose, more specific to Kerry Airport, but maybe of general interest. In relation to Kerry, I'm old enough to remember when Farnford Airstrip was a little playground for amateur aviators, and who would have thought it would become the success story it is today, and how important a part of the great infrastructure of Kerry and Munster it has become. And I do note that pre-COVID, in the past year, you were showing an increase in passenger numbers of 1.2%. So the systems were all heading in the right direction, obviously, up to now. And I think the government's injection of capital into all 3 airports, especially into the smaller regional airports, shows the confidence that government has in your capacity to survive and to continue to develop, hopefully when this terrible COVID crisis is over. My few questions would be, I suppose, general to all 3, but sooner or later, hopefully COVID will be over. Apart from depending on government grants to restore, shall we say, normality, have you got contingency post-COVID plans in place, to kind of hit the ground running and to restore flights, increase passenger capacity, maybe create further jobs? That would be a general question to all of you. In relation to Kerry, the Kerry Airport has to be commended in sourcing out new routes like Frankfurt and Alicante and Faro and so on. Is it going to be possible into the future to continue in that line? And are we too reliant on 1 or 2 airlines? Do they have a kind of a monopoly situation on the airport? And do you see that as a problem? And do you see any way in which additional airlines may be persuaded? I noticed what Mr. Gilmore said there with interest about it's a higher risk for airlines to be flying into smaller airports than, shall we say, the Londons and so on. I take that on board, but hopefully there might be something there. And very specific then to Kerry. And I also actually commend the directors there. I notice your board of directors, it's a private company, but it is very, very embracing of business interests, tourism interests, the local authority interests. I'm glad you have a local authority elected member there. But in terms of the space, I suppose this is a sign of the difficulties that success brings. Could I ask Mr. Mulryan, have you any plans to increase the airport concourse? You know, it can be very crowded there at busy times, you know, with departures and arrivals all up on top of each other, only at very busy times. Have you any plans to develop there and to extend?
Well, thanks, Senator, for giving me the opportunity and for your questions. And I'll take them all, each in their own right. Yes, we have a large marketing plan and a plan for route development, which we had in place and ready to push before the COVID-19 outbreak. And we were in discussions with some of the smaller airlines to develop connections between our own regions and particularly regions of the UK and also into France and Italy. As you know, the COVID-19 has put all of that on hold. The discussions are still there in the background, and not unlike Joe in Ireland West, we really want to see how we can connect our own region to smaller regions across the UK, particularly in England and Scotland. We had very strong conversations that were looking fruitful about how we could mutually support the establishment of connections with smaller aircraft, you know, less than 100 passenger, that would support us for survival into the future with better connections to smaller population centres around the UK. And not unlike the other airports, the vast majority of our passengers now are with Ryanair, and Ryanair's suspension of all routes in the regional airports has caused significant harm to our operations and profitability here. Like the other airports, our income is based on passenger numbers. Our franchises with car hire companies, restaurants and cafes and so forth are all dependent on high turnover of passengers. And of course, we've no income from them now, whilst we've very little or no passengers. So we're keen to spread our reliance on just one airline. When we look up north to Joe, we see he and they were very successful at doing that, but suffered great harm, which we fully understand and respect. When Flybe failed there recently, and it caused a lot of harm, but still, to rely on one airline for us is difficult, and we certainly are looking to spread to other airlines if that can be possible. But those smaller airlines are fearful of taking risk. And so I agree with Joe that any support that could come to encourage those smaller airlines to develop routes from regions in the United Kingdom and further afield into the regions of Ireland would be very grateful. Our own airport supports well over 1,000 jobs in the county and brings in tens of millions of income from our passengers in tourism and in business. We're very pleased that the airport has begun to encourage remote working for businesses that are wishing to settle up in rural Ireland, whilst keeping a connection for the occasions when they need to travel to Dublin and onwards for their own business. And we really need that to continue and to recover. The plan, which we had presented to Minister Ross not long ago, and which our colleague and friend, Deputy Brendan Griffin, is aware of, which was for a €7 million expansion of the airport to allow us to be able to cater for larger aircraft and larger volumes of passengers. Because you're right, Senator, and I agree, our airport is small, and our accommodation there allows for only 200 to 300 passengers at a time, when there are times that we could easily manage, would like to manage multiples of that. So we have a plan. it's there. It's with the department, and it's with the minister. And I spoke about it recently with Minister of State Hildegard Naughton, and she could see that it was for us an important step forward if we are to be able to grow sustainably into the future. So yes, I agree, Senator, and it is still our plan once we get through this period of turmoil to continue with that blue sky development plan into the future. And thank you.
Chairman.
Deputy Pat Daly, 5 minutes. Deputy.
Gormagat Cahirlock agus to Falter of Cork agus Walma Mavwekes Hoort the Chapter Darren O'Rourke and show in your. I'll direct my questions really to John, if you don't mind, and just like to congratulate Kerry Airport. Look, everybody knows that the business links, but also it provides a very important social link, particularly to immigrant communities in Greater London area, Birmingham, Manchester, Coventry, places like that. I'd like to congratulate you, John, on the work that you've done. I met you recently, and in relation to the rebranding, what you've done with the retail section there and the bar, and the new whole baggage X-ray, the investment that you've put into that. Hopefully, it will allow journeys through Kerry Airport to be better journeys. In relation to, I'd also like to congratulate you on the way that you kept the employees there for so long, that nobody was laid off up to recently anyway, and that the 57 direct and hundreds of other jobs in the community have been supported. We just have a number of questions there. In your annual report, you mentioned that in the second quarter, passenger numbers were down from 102,000 to 808. And what's the comparison been in the third quarter? In relation to the new funding, which was announced recently yesterday, how long is that funding going to sustain you? I know that you did receive a 1.9 million capital grant, I think it was in 2019. So how long will this funding keep you going? Have you had any talks? The third question is in relation to with the HSE at all, or is just the private provider? And in relation to the PSO, then are you happy enough with the way that is going? Because I think the Dublin link allows a lot of the big spend American tourists into the county, and maybe if you could give us an update on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Daly, and it's very much appreciated yourself and your party's support to the airport. You've spoken to me on a number of occasions and visited us and supported us through this difficult time, and it's very much appreciated. Yes, indeed, they're very difficult times, and we do welcome the money that has been announced yesterday and the support to the regional airports, not just to us, but also to our friends in the Donegal and Ireland West. Hard to difficult to estimate yet, because we're not sure how Ryanair will make decisions on connections with returning routes from suspension over the winter. Presently, what we know about so far is that potentially there will only be 4 flights a week with Ryanair, 2 to Stansted and 2 to Luton. And those alone will not sustain us through the winter. And hence, as you said, we fought bravely to keep all our employees at work, despite reducing salaries by around 15%. We were lucky enough to park an entire fleet of aircraft from one of the airlines, which brought in a significant amount of income and kept most of our employees at work, without the need to go towards the employment suspension supports. However, the cancellation and suspension of all Ryanair flights, without that income we had from aircraft parking, has put us in a position where we've no choice but to lay off approximately 50% of our staff for a number of weeks. The PSO is, of course, essential to our survival, and it ran throughout the lockdown, and it made it possible for many people in Kerry to make journeys to Dublin that were essential, including people I know myself who were having cancer treatments in Dublin. And we are very grateful indeed for that. So third quarter numbers picked up significantly in comparison to second quarter, but nothing like we would normally have in that period. We were handling around 1,200, 1,400 passengers per week in quarter three, when we would normally handle many multiples of that. Presently, our passenger numbers are down around 90% year on year. So that would give you an idea of the impact of COVID. We also have significant traffic between ourselves and the United States. We have great connections with some of the large golf courses and tourist centres in the southwest, and it drives a large proportion of our commercial activity. And of course, all of that was lost to COVID. We hope that the vaccine and the new travel corridors will bring back that traffic in 2021. It's a major part of our income. That traffic itself is a major employer for many parts of Kerry. So it must return, and we hope that corridor to the United States, especially with the good news of the election of President Biden, a friend of Ireland and a friend of the west of Ireland, that news will help bring about a recovery in our connections to the United States. Those American tourists are very important to us. On average, they spend multiples of some of our other tourists in the local economies and sustain employment and livelihoods for so many. So, yes, Deputy Daly, and thank you for your questions and thank you for your support. And we like the other airports, we would welcome any support from government to help us achieve smaller airline connections to regions, particularly into 2021, when they'll be more important than ever. Thank you.
Deputy Brendan Griffin, 5 minutes.
Could I welcome all of the contributors this morning, and just to say that I was closely monitoring proceedings from my office for social distancing purposes, but I'm glad to be here now in the room. And can I first of all thank all of you for the contribution that you make to Irish tourism. And from my time in the department, I became very familiar with the work that all of you do in your respective airports, and the importance to your regions it cannot be overstated. And to all of you, I want to thank you for the jobs that you provide directly, but also the thousands and thousands of jobs that you facilitate as well through providing those vital access points to your regions. I definitely want to concur with previous speakers in relation to welcoming the funding yesterday, Chairman. I think it's really, really important, and it's vital now that funding is got out to the front line as quickly as possible. And I would hope, like many of the other government schemes that have been announced since the start of COVID, that they will be user-friendly and accessible and will get to the people who need it as quickly as possible. And again, I hope that it will sustain us through this period until we get to a point where we can return to some form of normality. Certainly looking at at the start of 2020, it was promising to be a very, very good year. But unfortunately, we all know what happened. So the challenge is to get back to that position. I think what will be crucial for all of the regional airports when the clock starts again is that there will be cooperative marketing funding for you to give you an opportunity to to provide sustainable routes. Because as we know, the larger airports are the safer option, as was said. And we often hear criticism of government, for example, that all of the routes are going in and out of Dublin. Government and airports can only do so much. If airlines are demanding to go to one particular airport, there's very little that others can do. But I do feel that, for example, the Regional Cooperative Marketing Fund that was in place was very helpful, and the combined work of Tourism Ireland, for example, and yourselves and the airlines was providing great progress. So that's something I think we all need to work harder on to ensure that there is that extra funding there to help you all when things get back to normal again. Just in particular in relation to John and Basil, I want to welcome you from Corry Airport and thank you for the work that you do, not just for County Kerry, but for the Southwest region. Corry Airport is one of the outstanding Kerry stories, and that's when you include Kerry football and everything else, it's right up there. It's a great, great story, and there are many chapters left as well, and this unfortunately is a dark chapter, but we will come through it. And I want to thank you for the work that you're doing. I know that there were really exciting things planned for 2020, particularly the new Manchester route was going to be a really exciting Northern UK route. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. But I would like to say that you have the full support of I think I speak for all of the Oireachtas members from the county, that your work is really important to everyone in Kerry, and we'll all continue to work on your behalf, to work with you. Could I just ask, if I could, in relation to the PSO and the Kerry Dublin PSO, what do you see as being a realistic timeline in terms of how we can get back to decent occupancy on that route? And could I also ask then as well, in relation to looking at connecting the region to region, do you feel that it would be a viable proposition, and have you researched to support the proposition?
Thank you, Deputy Griffin, and thanks again for all your support. We're looking closely at the PSO numbers, and of course, the numbers travelling between Dublin and Kerry are low. They did recover in Q3 because when everybody was encouraged to staycation, a lot of people were travelling between Dublin and Kerry for holidays, and numbers improved significantly. But of course, they've fallen off a little bit now, as we all are in level 5. However, we believe that once level 5 is successful, and we're certain it will be, that those numbers will recover. But rather it'll be in late Q1 or Q2 of 2021 before we see significant growth again in the PSO numbers up to the levels that we enjoyed before COVID. And also, we did look at, and I have had some interest from an airline in connecting the regions. Their reasoning is similar to how the new transport system in Dublin, where you have a system of buses that connect the city on the outside, and some are on spokes of the wheel to bring the traffic in. And they were looking at how they could connect Kerry to Donegal, whilst shuttling through Shannon and Ireland West, to build a new sort of structure of connecting the west coast of Ireland by air, particularly in the summer season, and particularly to encourage holiday makers to travel up and down the west coast of Ireland. And those who are keen to go towards something like that will be looking for support as a new or option of a PSO that would support Kerry, Shannon, Ireland West and Donegal, with new planes, smaller planes, in and out of the regions in themselves. So if it was something that anyone in government felt was a possibility, even for a summer or two, whilst we recover over the next 3 or 4 years, I'm certain that the other regional airports would get on board to support it. Thank you.
Thanks, John. I think it's a very interesting one, and it deserves to be looked at government level. And I think it's something that could be a game changer for the Western Seaboard. So it's definitely something that's I think warrants further scrutiny. Thank you. Thanks for everything that all of you do. Thank you.
Senator Lisa Chambers, you have 5 minutes.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. I'm going to be very parochial about this and focus solely on Ireland West Airport Knock, and it's great to see Joe Gilmore with us here this morning. Sorry?
It's in keeping with the theme of the day.
Well, we're proud people in Mayo, Chair, as you know, and the airport is very close to our hearts. And it is, I mean, it's one of the big issues that has been coming up for me in the last number of months is, even this morning getting a text saying, we can't let anything happen to our airport. There really is a huge sense of ownership by the people of Mayo and even the west of Ireland. Chair, you'll be aware that 7 of the local authorities in that region actually came together. I was a member of Mayo County Council when this happened to put almost €8 million into the airport with all of those local authorities coming together. It was an unprecedented deal that was done, but it shows you how much importance the region attaches to this airport. Not just the 100 people employed directly, the 3,000 indirect jobs, the impact it has on the hospitality and tourism sectors. It's of huge importance, and it's our connection to the world. And for many reasons, I think Monsignor Horan, who obviously at the outset was told he was completely mad to envisage an airport in the foggy, boggy hills of Mayo, he managed to pull it off, and in no small part because the people of Mayo supported him. So I suppose my question, Joe, I know you met recently with An Taoiseach to discuss this issue, and I'm sure, no doubt, that along with Donegal and Corry, you're very welcoming of the additional funding that was announced. Was it yesterday now? I think the additional 28 million. Joe, just I suppose in terms of where the airport is at now, I mean, we all know that it is, and I'm very biased, but I think it is probably the most efficiently run airport in the country. I know from travelling through the airport on many occasions that, everybody does more than one job, and that's how efficiently the airport is run. And I know that there's been a very aggressive cost-cutting measures employed with the support of staff to make sure that the airport can survive and is doing its part. And even the development fee, the €10 that people pay on departing from the airport, people locally have no problem paying that. They're quite happy to support the airport by paying that fee to make sure that it has the money that it needs to stay there. So, Joe, just in terms of where the airport is at now, on top of the money that was received yesterday and previous supports, are you in a position where you think you're okay for the coming months, or what additional supports do you think might be required, say, in the next 6 to 12 months?
Mr. Gilmore.
Thank you, Senator, and thank you for your positive comments on the airport. It's appreciated. In terms of where we are at the moment, I think, as I said earlier, we've had a catastrophic year, no more than the other airports. So we're actually effectively back to the 1990s in terms of passengers, of about 140,000 this year compared to 800,000 last year. So we have a massive hill to climb over the next number of months. But we're hopeful and getting more confident as the weeks progress and as we get through this pandemic, and with the support of the government and the regional stakeholders and local authority partners and chambers that we've got, we're very confident we can get back. It's a question of timing, and it's a question of how quickly the markets open up, and there's been a lot of discussion on that. We are, like the other airports, in discussion with a number of airlines. Aer Lingus and Ryanair are our 2 main partners here. We lost, unfortunately, Flybe through insolvency, but we're confident we can replace their services and hopefully continue to grow and push towards 1 million passengers in the not too distant future. From a financial perspective, the announcement yesterday will serve to protect our cash position and our balance sheet position, because we do want to be able to recover quickly and recover fast and have the necessary strength of balance sheet, as do the other airports, to be able to recover and play our part in what should be hopefully a strong economic recovery over the next 12 to 18 months.
Thanks very much, Joe. I think your next point now should be to make sure that President-elect Joe Biden flies into Ireland, into Knock Airport, into his ancestral home. I know that we'd love to see that happening. I
think President-elect Joe Biden will end up having to fly into Ireland a number of times to cover all the airports, including Shannon.
Well, as long as it's Mayo first, we don't mind. Thank you, Chair, for your indulgence. Thanks very much, Joe.
Maybe we could bring him in December to accept Sam for us.
I'll go with a few questions myself. To all the airports, right, and I've put this to all the airports coming in, and for, I suppose, the general public out there. So in terms of the West Knock Airport, in terms of Donegal Airport, and in terms of Corry Airport, do you expect you'll be flying people home for Christmas? And both in terms of the airlines and in terms of the level of COVID testing you have available both in orange and red, and your financial wherewithal to be able to do it. So if you could, maybe I'd start with Donegal, Mr. O'Quillan, and if I could move then to Mr. Mulhern, and then of Kerry Airport, and then Joe Gilmore, and finally of Cork.
I meant to get to answer Ned O'Sullivan. He had a question earlier about contingency posts.
You can deal with that first if you like, Mr. O'Quillan.
Okay, thanks. Well, we have a plan. We have a 5-year plan in place, like most of the other airports. We finished it before the COVID pandemic set in.
You might put your microphone up, Mr. O'Quillan. Put your microphone up a bit higher.
Your sound is bad.
Yeah. Do you know
your mic?
Yeah, your mic, yeah. That's better.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, it's better, yeah.
Okay. Just in response to Senator Sullivan's question on contingency post-COVID plans, we have a 5-year plan in place. The emphasis there is on marketing, and our plan is to increase the throughput through the airport 5% year on year. Obviously, now post-COVID, we'll have to try and get our numbers back to where they were pre-COVID and go on from there. We had a visit from, just to acknowledge, we had a visit from Minister Hildegard Naughton to the airport there in last September, and she spent a lot of time with us, and we presented her with synopsis of the plan, and received very well. And that's in response to that. Deputy Griffin had a query on region to region. Well, the Wild Atlantic Way stretches, as we know, from Malin to Missin, so it's there, the road is there, so I'm sure the possibility of going by air should be looked at. We're presently undertaking a feasibility study on trying to increase our routes, and that is something that we can include as part of that study. Could we get people over Christmas? Well, as you know, Donegal have a huge diaspora across the way in Scotland. I'm sure they would like to fly back. Logan Air will not be flying into Donegal, I don't think, until March, because it's a commercial run on a commercial basis, and we won't be able to see that reopening up until March. Maybe Anne, if you'd like to add to that.
Yeah. We would have a lot of people connecting through Dublin, obviously down to Donegal as well. And we have calls, regular calls to see what are the changes. So now we'll be able to update our website with the new regulations, and hopefully people will be able to get back to Donegal for the Christmas period. The 14-day quarantine is obviously a big issue. No. There's no direct flights. We did have Logan Air, obviously, as the chairman said, and we worked closely with them to keep from the beginning of June, but unfortunately with the second, Donegal particularly, and was locked into level 3 and level 4 in September, and then the whole country down to level 5. It just wasn't feasible to continue any more services to Glasgow.
And if we move from level 5, reduced levels from level 5 from the 1st of December, would Logan Air not consider coming on board?
Sorry, didn't hear that. Well, we have to do a joint risk, share the risk with them for the finance of it, because it's purely commercial. And we will approach them again, but obviously it's not just as easy as putting on aircraft, because they would have cut back on their crews and all of that as well. So it's looking more like the spring before our Glasgow service is back in situ.
Thank you. Mr. Mulhern and Kerry.
Well, we hope that our diaspora will be able to get home for Christmas. Like the others, we're rural populations, and there are a lot of people who've spent a very long time living alone in rural Ireland, who would like nothing better than to be reunited with their families this Christmas. We have 3 routes for our diaspora to come back into the county. One through Luton, one through Stansted, and probably the major one will be through Dublin on the PSO interlining with flights from all over the world. And I personally believe that the measures that are in place now in the level 5 will bring about a fall significant enough here for COVID numbers to fall to safe levels. And I believe similar will happen in the UK with their similar decision and their similar level of lockdown there, that may well bring their numbers down to a level that brings them close to or within the green zone that we all hope for. We have been in discussions, which I believe will be fruitful in the next week or so, to allow people to avail of PCR testing if they do come from orange or red or grey zones or regions. And the private company we're dealing with, I believe, will, if everything works to plan, supply a PCR test, which will be 50 or 60% cheaper than some of the other companies are supplying now. So it is possible if you do it in volume.
What cost will that be per person?
So we're looking at a number at around €80 per person. And if we can get that, which I believe we can, it would make it that little bit more affordable for people to travel home if they need a PCR.
Is that off-site?
And that is off-site.
But that's nearby Corry Airport?
Yeah, it's nearby Corry Airport.
And the flights you're talking about coming back in, they're Ryanair flights?
They're Ryanair flights from Luton and Stansted.
And are they currently flying at the moment? They're not flying at the moment?
They're not flying at the moment. They have flights scheduled for around the Christmas season.
And are they taking bookings at the moment?
They are indeed, and I believe the bookings are high.
Okay, good. Mr. Gilmore, those 2 questions.
Thanks, Deputy. Yes, like Kerry, we will have services over the Christmas at this point from London, Stansted, Luton and Liverpool. And we expect people to travel.
All Ryanair?
On Ryanair, yes. The numbers that will travel will be dependent on the pandemic situation and whether it's green, orange or red. Obviously, if we're both green, and we hope we do, we'd expect very strong numbers and more flights to be added. Realistically, it'll be probably orange or red, and a testing requirement will be there. So the numbers that will travel will then be ultimately down to each individual's decision. We plan to provide and facilitate testing here on the PCR testing, but again, it'll be down to each individual's decision on if they will travel, if it's an orange or red situation.
2 quick questions there. At the moment, you've no flights coming into Knock.
Our last flights are this coming Friday, and we close from this Friday.
And that's with Ryanair?
Yes.
And have Ryanair stated when they're reopening the flights, obviously to Stansted and Luton?
December 12th, 4 weeks from Saturday.
And they're taking bookings?
Yes.
And they're healthy bookings?
We're not sure. We haven't got any forward visibility on it at this stage. Typically, we'll get maybe 2 weeks before they restart. But we'd assume they're reasonably healthy, given it's Christmas. We do want to note, though, Deputy, that because of the uncertainty, there is always people are booking much later before they travel. And so
the cost of the PCR test, you anticipate? The cost?
The cost, I think, as outlined before, is in the region of €149 at a starting level. If Kerry have a solution, much more cost-effective solution, would be very interested in getting more details on that.
Will the traveller, the person who's flying, will they have to pay for that test?
Yes, it would be a private provider.
And I presume the same, Mr. Mulhern, just a one-line answer. That's the same for Kerry. It would be the private person.
Yes, the same for Kerry.
And then can I ask just one final question to the 3 of you? Do you know precisely the level of funding you're getting in terms of the 6 million, the additional funding? And have you been told by the department when you anticipate you'll get the funding, and do you regard it as adequate funding, in a position to state the amount you've received? So I might start with Mr. Mulhern, and then I'll go to Mr. Gilmore and finish with Mr. O'Callaghan.
Thank you. Yeah. The breakdown of how that funding will be made is not clear yet, and the department have told us they will inform us soon about how that will be made.
So you don't know the precise amount of the 6 million you're receiving?
Yes, we don't know certainly yet how that will break down to all the different regional airports.
And are you at liberty to say the level of funding you would require of that 6 million?
Well, I suppose all of the airports will probably give the same answer, which is this funding will bring us to a place where we have bridged the problem we have suffered so far. It won't pull us through what is to come in the next 6 to 12 months if recovery is slow. But it certainly is very welcome indeed.
Thank you, Mr. Mulhern. Mr. Gilmore?
Likewise, we have no figure. We have sought support to the level of to achieve a break-even situation at operational level. So we've indicated, unfortunately, we're sustaining losses of close to 4 million. So that's the number we have been seeking support for.
Okay. And finally, Mr. O'Cullen.
Currently, no, we haven't any specific figure discussed with the department. We welcome the additional funding, and we'll be in contact with them very quickly.
Are you on?
Microphone again, yeah. Thanks very much, Mr. O'Cullen. Do either wish to? We have to be out here by past. Great. So I give you 3 minutes.
I really appreciate that, Chair. Thanks. And I just want to go back again to Ireland West in Knock, obviously. And Joe, I want to ask you specifically around the West being in the region in transition, and what opportunities you might think that presents, particularly in terms of capital funding from the 750 billion EU fund, and indeed from the Brexit fund as well, that's going to be in place. And what can we do as Oireachtas members to make sure that we, I suppose, take advantage of that or use that opportunity, albeit in the context of being a region in transition?
Thank you, Deputy. I think it's fair to say probably over the last 9 months it's been difficult to focus on those opportunities that you're outlining. With the investor grouping we have and shareholding group we from 7 local authorities from Donegal right across Connacht and the 2 Galway local authorities, there's a tremendous opportunity there from a collaborative perspective to make applications for a proportion of those funding, given that we're at a central point in the Wild Atlantic Way, has been highlighted earlier, but also the Atlantic Economic Corridor in terms of supporting the further economic development and employment along the whole corridor from Donegal right down to Cork. So we would welcome, support from that side on a collaborative basis right along the Western Seaboard in the best way to go about funding and accessing monies through those schemes. At this point, we have no specific plans apart from the focus of ensuring that the airport business, as we're managing here, remains solvent and gets through this crisis.
And just in terms, are we doing a comparison, a matrix, if you like, in terms of what other EU states are levering for airports or airports similar size to Knock, and indeed the other regional airports? I'm just talking about in terms of maybe the skew of the balance of funding going to the bigger countries like Germany and others. Where do we sit? Is there a league table on where we sit in terms of the funding that we're attracting, either under the COVID measures or outside of that?
Well, I think it's on record from a recent committee meeting there that I think Mr. Cornelius, the EU delegate last week, was on record that there's no application yet made yet from the government to Europe for support funding for aviation sector. So I assume the 80 million support package that has been announced in Budget 21 and yesterday's additional funding will form the initial application for that. In terms of a skew and a league table, I think the airlines in particular are on record in relation to the level of support and funding that has been put into that sector across Europe. ACI, the Representation Association for 400 airports in Europe, are on record last week that up to 200 airports could go insolvent in the next 12 to 18 months. And they are seeking significant supports across Europe. So the airlines have gained most of the support. I think the airports are only at this stage starting to access funding. But in the Irish case, I couldn't answer for government, but I'm assuming that this initial package announced over the last couple of weeks is the first tranche of funding that will be sought support on.
Okay, thank you. Well, I'll follow that up as well. Thanks, Joe.
Just, I suppose, in conclusion, a couple of points. The PCR test that's being put forward in terms of people coming in terms of orange and red in particular, it cannot be prohibitive for people to travel. And like even here, the discussion where Mr. Mahern was saying in Kerry it was about €80 per person. You're saying the quote you're getting, Mr. Gilmore, are about €149.50 per person. There appears to be disparity. I think there's work to be done there, where we'll say all the airports and the Department of Transport working together to try and find a mechanism whereby we can get the cost of the test down to a rate that is affordable for people. And it's something that I would call on government to look at now in a great way. We cannot have a situation where we're putting in mechanisms where people come home for Christmas, but from some people who may be on low income, that it's prohibitive for them to come home. So that's a measure we'd probably take up. We've agreed that we'll write to the Department of Transport to see where the position is in terms of the 6 million in terms of EU state aid for the regional airports, and we'll correspond with you in that regard. On that, we have to be out of here by 1:30. So finally, I would like to thank the representatives of Kerry Airport, Mr. Mulhern, Donegal Airport, Mr. Quillan, Ms. Bonner, and obviously Ms. Eilish Docherty. And finally, I'd like to thank the representative of Ireland West Airport in Knock, Joe Gilmore, for attending the engagement with our committee. Thank you very much. The meeting is now adjourned.